From Kansas State University, this is Agriculture Today. Eric Atkinson here. Coming up today, K-State's Glynn Tonsor with this week's cattle market segment. Glynn will talk about how the return to more normal packing plant operations has affected the latest price movement in the cattle markets. Then, K-State's Jeanette Thurston and Patti Dollarhide will talk about changes in food consumption resulting from the pandemic and how the beef industry might capitalize on that. Their comments are from the latest BCI Cattle Chat podcast. Also, K-State's Juergen Richt and Philip Hardwidge will talk about a new $11 million grant to establish research at a new center on emerging and zoonotic infectious diseases at K-State. And Jeff Wickman will be in with this week's 4-H segment. All that right here on Agriculture Today.
While many people know hunger is an issue in developing countries, it is also a problem in our own backyards. In 2010, 1 in 7 Kansans struggled to put adequate food on the table. 2 K-State research and extension programs are tackling this problem. The Family Nutrition Program and Expanded Food and Nutrition Education Program reach thousands of Kansans in more than 70 counties. They learn how to eat healthy with a low budget. For more information about these programs, visit ksre.ksu.edu.
You're tuned in to Agriculture Today. Welcome once more. The cattle markets front and center now as we visit with livestock economist Glynn Tonsor of K-State Research and Extension. In a few moments, we'll pass along the latest projections on feedlot returns to you cattle producers. But Glynn, we want to recap last week's markets first of all, and not a stellar week by any means for the trade.
No, but I think it depends on what component of the trade we're going to pick apart here. So I feel it important to remind us where we're at on the processing story. A lot of the contention in the industry and a lot of the commentary has been about our ability to harvest animals. Mm-hmm. And that part of the story actually continues to improve. So I want to start there. The initial estimate by AMS through Saturday for the full week was 658,000 head. That's up from 636 the week before and is just under 669 for the same week the year before. That puts us year to date on cattle just a little bit more than 6% behind where we were same point year before when there wasn't COVID. That's a pretty miraculous recovery. On the hogs, we're only down 1% for quick context there. So that is helping add some sense of normality to this story. Now, we can talk more about the cost involved in doing that are higher than they were last year and other components, but just the sheer ability to handle more animals continues to improve, and that's wonderful. Let's break apart the fed cattle market. So when we look at cash, AMS called the Kansas market 103 to 107 on Friday, 5 area price about 104. Both down notably for the week. Round that out against the board. There's actually improvement in the nearby June contract. There's a 95, just under $96, up over $2 for the week. So there's a narrowing on the basis story embedded in that comment. Cash prices were on par actually where we were last year. So yes, compared to last week, we've lost, but it's important to note they have recovered compared to say a few weeks back. Mm-hmm. And maybe most importantly, carcass weights are actually coming down. So seasonally, we tend to see that. We broke that trend in the past of those weights going up. That's consistent with our ability to push more animals through the system. I'm highlighting this because it's not, yes, I'm an economist and prices matter, but the ability to move animals and get the volume flows to quote unquote something closer to normal is central to these markets working the way that people want them to work. And then we can get back to kind of solely talking about prices, but you got to understand the volume flow and the prices to really see what's going on. The feeder cattle side of this, AMS called Kansas feeder cattle steady to $3 higher, depending on what part of the broader region we're talking about. 2 specific cash lots here in Kansas, 181 head weighing 762, came in at 129 last week. And then a bigger lot, 530 head that weighed 926, came in at 123. The board for feeders was actually down this past week. So August contract was just over 131, down about $1.50. I think there's multiple things at play here is, yes, we're running more animals through processing facilities. We're getting beef flows back to somewhat normal for consumers. So the chatter about meat shortages, I hope, is behind us in many ways. And hopefully we've stopped stacking up cattle in the feedlot. Implicit in that, those lower weights is consistent with that. But we still don't have rosy feedlot margins. So this give and take on, feeder cattle, fed cattle prices is embedded in what I'm sharing here. And the lower feeder cattle prices are concerning because going forward, feedlots aren't anxious to be buying. And in a minute, we're going to talk about, or I'll just jump right now to it, what happened in the wholesale beef market. And we continue to see a strong pullback which I would argue is largely reflecting the supply change. So choice cutout was just below 231 to end the week on Friday, down more than $30 from the Friday before. And the slut cutout broke below 220 and is down over $26 from the week before. Our listeners will remember that's about $200 below where we were at the peak. And we're back to, very close to pre-COVID levels. And, again, we're still trying to work out the meat supply story. The actual mix and size of products and so forth consumers getting isn't perfect yet. But I think we're well past the tight supply coming out of the back of this processing facility story. And those quickly eroding cutout prices are not supportive for fed cattle prices.
Well, when you talk about the cutout trade, yes, we've seen this precipitous drop, but is it more a factor of things becoming more in balance in a normal sense then?
I think it's two things, and this is a segue into our demand discussion, but the tight supply component of this is in the past, so to speak. It's not perfect. We don't have the system running, it's not a well-oiled machine yet, but when we're back to running almost the same number of animals we did same time last year, the number of animals coming in and therefore the pounds being produced is getting closer to normal. So the supply support for higher wholesale beef prices is not where it was a month ago. Nobody could dispute that. So that leads to lower cutout prices. I also think there's growing signs that beef demand may be weaker and in the past had been hidden by tight supplies. So we had higher prices being talked about, but maybe that was largely because supplies were holding it up, not because consumer demand was real strong. And that's worrisome for the rest of the summer. So we can dive into that topic a little bit.
Let's make that segue into the demand side, if we might. Domestic demand in April, well, we saw a pullback from previous year levels.
Yeah, so beef for April, was down 17%, pork a full 26%, and chicken 1% when we talk domestically. So I'm comparing April 2020 versus April 2019. I made some little side notes here to make sure I interject these. This is sort of parallel to what we see when I go back in my notes to what happened in the Great Recession. So 2008, 2009 period, obviously parts of this COVID pandemic induced recession are different, but as it relates to consumer response, consumers tend to weaken demand when macroeconomic activity declines. In August of 08, beef demand was down 16%. So it doesn't surprise me that we found in April, I'm saying it was down 17%. For the fellow geeks out there, what I'm doing here is comparing what we estimate per capita consumption was with what we would have projected it to be given prices. So if people didn't consume as much as we thought, given the prices reported, beef demand was weaker. That's basically what I'm saying here in April. So yes, prices were higher, but I account for that in this exercise. Ted Schroeder and I did a whole webinar this past week on domestic and international beef demand. For those who want more details on this, but there are growing confirmation points that beef demand may be weakening, and that's quite concerning. A little bit of a sliver of good would be on the export demand front, and this is where economist has to sell a negative number is good. So beef demand by foreign buyers in April was minus 7%. A negative 7 isn't nice, right? Obviously, we'd rather have growth, but please note that's a much smaller decline than domestically. So there's some optimism that maybe foreign buyers are staying put. Maybe they will be part of the raising back up the total aggregate demand story, particularly if we have a V-shaped recovery. There's more and more chatter the last couple of weeks that consumers are spending. Maybe as we go through June, so remember now we're talking June, I'm reporting stuff for the month of April right now. Maybe this summer will turn the tide on this. So there's reasons to be, I'm going to call it cautiously hopeful that on the export front might be where we initially see some of that improvement. And I encourage our listeners just to look at this information. It's on agmanager.info. It's updated monthly.
Including that webinar that you conducted with K-State's Ted Schroeder on demand, agmanager.info. Glynn, to the updated projections on feedlot cattle returns then. Once more, it's about red ink, but less so than we've seen previously and more encouraging than what was thought earlier on several weeks ago.
Yeah, very much. And you summarize this well. So our listeners probably know once a month I put up this barometer, and it's reflecting a non-hedged. So you're getting cash prices, paying cash prices story. For the month of June, what's up here is a loss of $276 for each steer that would be sold in the month of June. Underneath that is a projection of a Fed price at right at $100. The break-even Fed price needed is $119. So time will tell, obviously, as the month of June goes. But that projection has improved compared to the past. Probably more importantly, as we go through the rest of 2020, those negative numbers start declining, and we'll get all the way out to Christmas. So the month of December, I'm projecting a minus 32. And underneath that, I basically have no basis. So a $1 fed cattle basis. Most of our listeners that are active in this space recognize we've had very strong basis the last several months. So actually my tool here that I'm putting out, if you're actually hedged and then you benefited from that larger positive basis, you've done much better than what I've been projecting the last several months, which is wonderful for those operations. That's why I keep interjecting this, be clear what this tool is. Some of the stuff we saw this past week where we started this off was futures and cash coming more together. So in some sense, folks are hoping that that happens more in the future. So we have a little more predictability on basis. So maybe we can make some risk management decisions in a more comfortable arena. But there's some hope that the feedlot sector effectively has managed to depress feeder cattle prices enough that we're going forward with animals here soon in the future where we're getting closer to projected break-evens. Now, we got to get to the end of this year to get to that point, but the pattern across the multiple months here in 2020 is consistent with that.
Lastly, we've a USDA cattle on feed report coming out this Friday. What you're looking for in part, Glynn, is further indications that the flow of cattle is becoming more and more current, correct?
Yeah, so consistent with my tone here earlier, I talked about the processing facilities' ability to harvest animals. That has a direct implication on the fed cattle stack up. There's been less chatter, but it is out there, and we need to recognize it on feeder cattle stack up. So I'm particularly interested in the marketing and placement numbers, which people always are every month in these, but they are extra important in the current environment to figure out exactly how many heavyweight steers and heifers we think we have in the system now, and has the feedlot industry turned the tide and picked up some placements. So we start easing the feeder cattle back up story. I'm cautiously optimistic the answer is yes to all those because of what's happened in the last 2 or 3 weeks. And again, this is a monthly effort, so it's going to be the next 2 or 3 months we're watching these reports to see that. But we need to recognize there's an awful lot of heavy feeder animals around the countryside that haven't found their way to the feedlot in a quote-unquote normal sequence. And that's really what I'm trying to tease out of this upcoming report.
Glynn, as always, thanks for your time and your input.
Thanks for having me on, Eric.
Livestock economist, K-State Research and Extension, Glynn Tonsor, on this part of Agriculture Today. For 25 years, K-State Research and Extension's Kansas Agricultural Mediation Services has been providing a no-cost, confidential place to call in and visit with an agricultural lawyer. Our experts are available to help you producers handle legal and financial issues. Explore your options and generate solutions. Call us at 800-321-3276 or visit us online. Kansas Agricultural Mediation Services. Agriculture Today continues now, winding our way through the 2020 pandemic and sorting through the subsequent impacts of it on the agriculture industry. The food consumption habits of many people have changed, thanks in large part to the shelter-at-home provisions, and food providers, including cattle producers, might want to take notice and capitalize on opportunities accordingly. That was the drift of the discussion during the latest Cattle Chat podcast out of the K-State Beef Cattle Institute. Here for you excerpts from that conversation now, joining regulars veterinarian Brad White and livestock economist Dustin Pendle, dietitian and food service specialist with the BCI, Patti Dollarhide, and the director of the Food Science Institute at K-State, Jeanette Thurston. Here's Brad.
So, Jeanette, I want to learn a little bit about your role and the Food Science Institute.
Sure. Well, Brad, first off, thanks so much for inviting me. This is great. I would love to introduce the Food Science Institute, although many of your listeners probably know about the Institute. So I was hired about a year ago to be the director of the Food Science Institute. And, the Institute is one of the few interdisciplinary programs that we have here at K-State. And I know there's several. Food Science Institute is one of them. And what does that mean? Well, that means that faculty in the Food Science Institute span many, many disciplines across 5 colleges, 13 departments. We cover disciplines in order to be able to address challenges of the food system. And so, we have over 55 faculty currently associated, and that's growing, especially with the different kinds of projects that we have planned for addressing COVID-19 issues. So we have some new folks working with us in the College of Vet Medicine, And we expect to be working more closely with other folks around the university.
Yeah, it's not just food safety. It is all about the distribution. How do you manage security of the whole system, right? Which is why it's so multidisciplinary.
Yeah, it's from the farm all the way to the consumer. So, and it's not only research, we're also doing, of course, we're educating the next generation of food scientists, and we're also doing a lot of fantastic extension programs. A lot of that has to do with food safety, but we do other things as well. You know, we help entrepreneurs across the state to develop food labels, to understand the nutrition of their food products. Really, the Food Science Institute really covers the entire food chain and addressing issues and finding solutions.
Excellent. So that is one of the areas that, as we're going to talk about today, some of the trends we see there coming. And we wanted to really talk with Patti and Jeanette. What do you see post-COVID? Because as we've changed our habits, and certainly we've changed some of the things that we do, instead of a daily stop off at the grocery store, which was not unusual for us to pick up one or two things on the way home. Now we're once a week or as infrequently as we can get to go to the grocery store. And some of those things might just stick because we've been doing this for 2 months. You talk about building a habit. If you do something similar over a 2-month period, it starts to become a habit. So I'm curious to you guys' opinion. What do you think will stick after this process?
Well, you know, I know just for my family on a personal level, you know, we now go to the grocery store like once every 2 weeks. And boy, it puts a lot of time and you know, back in your life. And so I'm pretty sure that at least for my family, which I think is a trend, you know, we'll probably keep up with that behavior of, you know, once every couple weeks. And so, you know, things that we look for when we go to the store are things that we know can hold in the refrigerator for those 2 weeks. So, you know, food, you know, shelf life is important to us right now, and probably will continue to be.
Absolutely, because that shelf life is, when you're going every day, it's not a big deal. But if you're going every couple of weeks, you got to have something that holds up. What about you, Patti? What are you seeing as far as changes?
I think that, you know, there's some real positives actually coming out of this, and that is, you know, some of the things that dietitians have suggested for years, that people take a list with them when they go to grocery shop, to as far as if they want to balance, you know, how much food you're purchasing and what your nutrition is and what your menu looks like, as well as how much food you may eventually waste, because I think we're a lot more sensitive now about we don't want to overbuy. And when you walk in the store and see a blank shelf or an empty shelf, it's very, you know, you have to be a little more thoughtful about what you're going to purchase. So I see that that we're shifting some of our habits to buying some of the basics, and we don't buy so many impulse buys. I've actually seen where people say they think they're eating healthier now than they did before.
One of the other things you've talked about is we're actually doing some meal prep at home. It's not all frozen, stick it in the oven and heat it up. You've got some time to actually prepare a meal.
You know, as we see meat prices going up, this is a time we're starting to see more people tried more less expensive cuts. And so I think thinking about the beef industry, or really any other meat industry, this is a time to try to get people to try a new cut and maybe increase the demand for that cut in the long run. And just as an example, you know, I'm kind of embarrassed to say this, but I've never cooked a tri-tip before until about 3 weeks ago. And man, I tell you what, that was really good. It was super easy to prepare. And I'm pretty sure that's going to be on our regular, you know, kind of like brisket. I do brisket a lot. I'm sure this tri-tip is going to be, you know, in that mix of things now. And so I think this is a prime opportunity for people in the beef, pork, or whatever industries to try to capitalize on this as people are trying new cuts.
I think it's great too, because there's a lot of versatility with beef. So if you look to that cut of meat you're talking about that's kind of different, maybe it's a big roast or something, and you have some leftovers or plan-overs now, as you want to call it. But beef has flexibility in how you can incorporate it. Maybe it isn't always the center of your plate, but it's a part of the plate. It's in another recipe, or how you work it for the next meal so they don't recognize it. But there's a lot of different things you can do with beef.
What did you say, plan-overs, Patti?
Yeah.
Is that they're not leftovers? You planned that? I like that. I have not heard that before.
I've never heard that either.
We have plan-overs. We have tacos, and then we have plan-overs. That's our lunch for the week, is that we have taco meat that we can just make tacos easy. So
word for the day, plan-over. I like it.
Plan-overs. And I think, oh, go ahead, Jeanette.
Oh, I was just going to say, I wonder, hearing all this, and for my family too, so we've been buying meat now from, Kansas State University, we're new here. And so we actually just bought tri-tip as well, roast. And so maybe this is a great opportunity for providing recipes on how to use some of these different cuts that people don't typically buy.
Patti, I may ask you, even though I want Jeanette to chime in, because I know you've worked a lot with some of the non-commercial operations, colleges, universities, talked about food distribution. What are some of the challenges that you've seen related to going through this COVID time?
Well, a lot of the challenges for them was when they had such a disruption in their demand. So their student population, was gone, and all of a sudden they had to deal with what do they do with the food that they have on hand. So that has been one of the challenges. And depending on how they're set up, some like K-State are well prepared because they have food storage areas and they do a lot of scratch cooking. So that's been one of the challenges. The other has just been as they look at new models of delivery. So right now people want things packaged as opposed to buffets or where they can help themselves. So they're doing a lot of things like carry out and take out. So like beef in a bowl, for example, how can I put a meal together and make it convenient for my customers to take it with them and to be safe?
Yep. Jeanette, what about you? And what kind of work is the Food Science Institute doing?
So a team of researchers here at K-State, as well as a few other partner institutions, are putting in proposals to address some of the challenges that the meat industry is having with COVID-19. But really, the challenges they have with their workers and the possible transmission of the virus within those plants. So putting together a few proposals on that, as well as the produce industry as well. So hopefully we'll get those funded and we'll be able to identify some safe practices for the meat industry so that they can continue production. We won't see the lags or the shutdowns of various processing facilities like we've been seeing recently.
Some creative solutions out there, just like if you look at our own state, Shop Kansas, where producers are actually connecting more with consumers. And my thought is that now that consumers have had a little insight into the food supply chain, there's a lot more questions now people are going to ask. So I think it's been an enlightening experience for a lot of us, but, we took a lot of things for granted before. So I think there's going to be even more questions, more opportunity to connect.
So Brad, I think, with COVID-19, there's so many, unfortunate things that have happened because of this pandemic. Maybe one of the very few bright areas might be that there's really an awareness now of the importance of not wasting food and the understanding of the complexity of the food chain, with the importance of, this kind of situation.
The director of the Food Science Institute at Kansas State University, Jeanette Thurston, along with Patti Dollarhide, Dustin Pendle, and Brad White of the Beef Cattle Institute at K-State. For a listen to the entire podcast, simply go to ksubci.org. Once more, that's ksubci.org. We'll return in a few moments. You're listening to Agriculture Today.
A social distancing tip.
Putting distance between yourself and others is critical to slowing the spread of coronavirus. So here are ways to stay in contact without the physical contact part. Call, send a text, set up a video conference, post on social media, dedicate a song on the radio. If you have symptoms of fever, dry cough, and shortness of breath, call your healthcare provider before going to their office. For more info, visit coronavirus.gov.
Let's all do our part, because we're all #AloneTogether. Brought to you by the Ad Council.
We're back now on this Agriculture Today, and to share more in-depth information on news that you may have heard about a few days ago, a veterinary research team here at Kansas State University will be working with a new grant from the National Institutes of Health to establish what is to be called, when it's all said and done, a new center on emerging and zoonotic infectious diseases. This has great importance not only to animal health, but human health likewise. And we've invited over from the College of Veterinary Medicine here at Kansas State the director and associate director of this new undertaking, Juergen Richt, you've heard from before here in the broadcast. And it's our first chance to visit with associate director Philip Hardwidge. So congratulations to the both of you. And since you're the director of this new initiative, Juergen, we'd ask what this is and its goal.
Thank you, Eric, for having me here. And as you already mentioned, this is a center on emerging and zoonotic infectious disease, which is sponsored by the National Institutes of Health, NIH. So we are very honored and excited to get a real significant infusion to our long-term work on emerging and zoonotic diseases here at Kansas State. And the center is focused on various viral and bacterial diseases, and it mainly sponsors young faculty, assistant professors at Kansas State, both in the College of Veterinary Medicine and in the College of Arts and Sciences. Plus, it has two scientific core units, one which deals with animal model pathology, and the other one, it's more molecular cell biology core, doing imaging and so on, and sequencing of pathogens. So we hope that within 2-3 years, these young investigators will produce enough data, preliminary data, so they can successfully submit really significant grants to the National Institute of Health or other entities to maintain support for young scientists at Kansas State and throughout the state of Kansas.
Philip, bring you in, and this is to, in effect, as Juergen is suggesting, create the next generation of leading scientists in the study of zoonotic infectious diseases then, correct?
Yeah. Thanks, Eric, for having me on your program as well. This is really a very important investment in the basic science infrastructure at Kansas State University. And when I say infrastructure, I don't mean brick and mortar. I mean the intellectual infrastructure, I mean mentorship, I mean facilitating how our junior scientists can really efficiently perform basic experiments to do really important world-class research.
Addressing infectious disease concerns, then, Juergen, practical application here?
This is an NIH, National Institute of Health grant. So this research is mainly focused on topics which are of interest and need to support public health. And obviously, as we all know, zoonotic diseases, which are transmitted from animals to humans, are a critical area of research for public health. Just remember COVID-19, coronavirus pandemic. This is an emerging and zoonotic disease. So our topic we are working with is very timely, and we will address both a lot of basic questions within this mission space, but we also will do some translational work, so it will obviously benefit not only research, but hopefully it will translate to the health of animals and people after this research is performed.
So it's a 5-year, $11.3 million grant, not a small chunk of change. Philip, how will this be launched? What sorts of things will be pulled together to make this happen?
Yeah, so we're excited to say that we've already launched this. We received news of the award a few weeks ago. The award started on June 1, and we were ready to go on June 1. Juergen already mentioned the the animal model and pathology core. Our goal there is to facilitate for these junior investigators the appropriate and efficient use of animals in their research projects. And then I have an additional role in directing the molecular and cellular biology. So this is what you might envision as the high-tech biotech center where all of the specialized equipment is housed. The state of Kansas and Kansas State University has been very generous. They've helped leverage our new grant. We're bringing in new equipment into the facility. We have programs to train new users and really expand the capabilities of our basic science equipment.
Juergen, how unique is this initiative here at Kansas State vis-a-vis the rest of the research world in the U.S. or even beyond then?
For us, this is not unique because we are working in this mission space for some time, but it's unique for us to get a center sponsored by NIH. And this is only phase 1. So we got $11.3 million for phase 1 for 5 years. If we are successful in the first phase, we can apply for phase 2, another 5 years. And if we are successful in phase 2, we can apply for phase 3, another 5 years. So in total, this could be a legacy center here at Kansas State dealing with a very important topic, namely emerging and zoonotic infectious diseases. So this is the beginning of hopefully something good and really great to happen here at Kansas State.
Well, it is definitely a huge feather in the cap of the university, the College of Veterinary Medicine, once more on the strength of a new $11.3 million grant bestowed by the National Institutes of Health to create what will be, by title, the new Center on Emerging and Zoonotic Infectious Diseases. Hearty congratulations to the two of you in initiating this and now leading it, and wishing you all of the best as it continues to unfold. Thank you for coming over telling us about it today.
Thanks for having us, Eric.
Thank you, Eric.
The director and the associate director of that center, respectively, from the College of Veterinary Medicine at K-State, Juergen Richt and Philip Hardwidge, with us on this part of agriculture today.
Did you eat today? Thank a farmer. A way to get more involved in agriculture is through 4-H and FFA. Through 4-H and FFA, we have been given multiple opportunities to grow as leaders and learn more about agriculture.
You can learn skills related to jobs, public speaking skills, and you get the opportunity to travel around the country and meet new people.
If you want more information about getting more involved in 4-H and FFA, visit them on their websites at kansasffa.org and kansas4h.org.
Welcome back, and thanks for joining us on Agriculture Today. Along with Eric Atkinson, I'm Jeff Wickman. Kansas 4-H youth in Northeast Kansas with an interest in science and technology are participating in an interactive online series of STEM-related activities. Douglas County 4-H Youth Development Specialist Kaitlyn Peine came up with the idea shortly after face-to-face interaction was stopped due to the coronavirus. She then reached out to other agents in Northeast Kansas to gauge their interest in the project.
Back in March, we were really faced with a challenge about how we were going to reach our youth audience without being face-to-face. And I had thrown that idea out on a Zoom call to see if anyone would be interested. But basically, I pitched the idea of having all of us agents collaborate together to facilitate hands-on science programming for youth. So we have 3 sessions going on right now. It's a 6-week series that we're looking at, and we're reaching elementary through high school age students with virtual STEM programming.
And how did you come up with the idea to do the mailing packets so that they would actually be working along with you?
So actually, when all of this started, I had been doing a lot of work with recorded video and found that it was really hard to gauge your audience interaction. And I thought, why don't we kick off a program where it's more virtual and interactive with the students versus just providing information through a recorded video. We do a lot of 4-H science programming in Douglas County, and I thought, what better way to engage these young people with science programming than to get materials in their hands that they likely don't already have at home. And we then built lesson plans for the kids to do activities with us. So each week they log on for an hour, and I have a great group of agents from across Northeast Kansas that are helping facilitate. We likely would not have been able to collaborate in this capacity face-to-face because geographically we are spread out so much. But the great thing is our youth are getting the chance to be taught by some of the best agents in Kansas, and they're learning science along the way.
So talk about some of the things that they're learning. What are some of the areas that you're focusing on?
The elementary aged sessions are environmental science and technology. So we learned about water quality. Last week, we actually learned about electricity and talked about circuitry and built a robot out of a plastic cup. So that was super fun. And we have lots of other engineering activities for the younger kids. They obviously like to do a lot of hands-on. So a lot of the lessons there are hands-on. The high school and middle school aged group, they're actually focusing on computer science, which is a huge topic and initiative in 4-H right now. So we're reaching those kids through a programming board called a playground circuit, and they are learning coding on the computer. So it's great that they get to be able to interact in that way and learn about coding along the way.
So are the agents taking certain weeks, or are they leading the entire series? How is that working?
That's a great question. Yes, each of us are in charge of different lessons. So not everybody has to teach all 6 weeks. The great thing about it is most of us do hop on every week because we utilize that breakout room feature, so we don't have 50 kids working through the engineer design process at one time. So we put them out into breakout rooms. Usually there's around 7 to 8 kids with each agent, and they're going through that engineering design process for each science challenge, which is great that we can support each other in that capacity and be able to teach the kids in the smaller group setting. And I should also include, just real quick, that Johnson County has a Google grant that is funded by Google, and they were gracious enough to help us fund this initiative through the Google grant, which is awesome because the kids actually only ended up paying about $10 a piece to participate, and their material packets were closer to $30 or above for the actual cost. So thanks to our grant funder, we're able to provide these experiences for kids at really a minimal fee. And their 4-H agent, Ami Lynn, when she originally got onto this group and we had a conversation via Zoom, of course, she said, well, honestly, I'm not able to facilitate this grant face-to-face at this time, so this is a great way for us to still reach kids through computer science programming and be able to utilize that funding. So we are super appreciative of Johnson County and their team supporting our effort.
How have the kids been reacting to this? I'm assuming that they probably really like this idea.
They do. We were super intentional that we did not kick off this program until after the school year ended. We have been hearing from our 4-H families during the school year that it was a lot for some of them to tackle school virtually. So we didn't start this until the beginning of this month, and I think that was a great idea on our part, honestly, because this is potentially the only program that these youth are doing virtually now. So it's nice, especially the elementary age kids. It's interesting to watch them. They're pretty squirmy and sitting in front of their computer, but they're doing a great job, and it is really hands-on. The building process for all of the science challenges and their end product doesn't always look the same, and that's okay. That's the great thing about science. We all test and apply what we learn in different ways. And so far, they're doing a great job of staying engaged. We do try to keep it under an hour each session, knowing that sitting in one spot is painful for adults, let alone younger ones.
So this will run into July then?
It will. We will wrap up our last session on July 8th. So most of us will kick off our county fair season shortly after that. And I think looking back, if I would have known that we were planning for county fair in such a labor-intensive way, we maybe would have shifted the timeline a little bit, but we're excited to be able to host these programs, and it helps that all of us are dividing and conquering with the lesson facilitation.
I know Extension always prefers the face-to-face programming, but in times like this, I think you've really taken some lemons and made lemonade.
Definitely. And I so appreciate the team jumping on board. They were all awesome and super receptive when I threw it out there. I wasn't sure if anybody was going to want to collaborate in this capacity. And we've learned along the way, too. This is definitely new water for us to be in this situation. Like you mentioned, we're very much a people-to-people organization, and to be facilitating programs this way, we're learning right along with the kids. And the great thing that I keep telling the team is if we are in a situation where we need to be virtual again in the fall or through the winter, we have a framework set up to work from. And we can definitely take what we've learned and apply that and make it even better.
That's Douglas County 4-H Youth Development Specialist Kaitlyn Peine. Other counties participating in the interactive online STEM series include Johnson, Leavenworth, Riley, Pottawatomie, and Geary. To learn more about programs within the Science, Engineering, and Technology Project area, visit kansas4h.org. And that'll do it for this edition of Agriculture Today. For Eric Atkinson, I'm Jeff Wickman. This is the K-State Radio Network.